This is Heart of the Guardians, where stories touch the soul and remind us that life always brings people back when we least expect it. It was a cold evening in December. The city lights shimmered across the glass walls of the new downtown mall. People hurried through the entrance, their laughter echoing in the frosty air. Among them was Ethan, a man in his late 20s, dressed in a black coat, his expression calm but distant. He had just finished a long day at work, and the only thing on his mind was grabbing a cup of coffee before heading home. His life had become simple, almost mechanical: work, eat, sleep, repeat. Yet, beneath that quiet routine, there was a hollow space that no amount of success could fill. As he reached the entrance, something caught his eye: a small figure sitting near the steps, wrapped in a tattered blanket, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Hungry. Please help." At first, Ethan didn't look twice. Beggars weren't uncommon near the mall. But as he walked past, a faint voice stopped him. "Sir, could you spare some change?" He turned around slowly. The girl's face was pale, her lips slightly trembling from the cold. Her hair was messy, and her clothes were faded. But there was something about her, something familiar that tugged at his memory. For a moment, his mind froze. It couldn't be. He knelt down, his heart pounding. "Leela," he whispered. Her eyes widened. Tears welled up instantly, glistening under the mall lights. "Ethan," she said, her voice breaking. He stared at her, his chest tightening. The last time he had seen her was 3 years ago, the day she left without a word. They had been college sweethearts, inseparable, planning a future together. Then, one morning, she was gone. No calls, no notes, no explanation. Now, here she was, sitting on the cold pavement like a stranger, begging for coins. Ethan's throat went dry. What happened to you?" Leela looked down, ashamed. "It's a long story," she said softly. He pulled off his coat and placed it around her shoulders. "Then tell me," he said firmly. "Because I've waited 3 years for answers." Her hands trembled as she held onto the coat. She looked exhausted, fragile, and scared, like someone who had been fighting too long just to survive. Ethan helped her stand and led her inside the mall cafe, ignoring the curious stares from others. He ordered hot chocolate and a sandwich, then sat across from her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy with memories, laughter, promises, and the pain of what was lost. Finally, Leela spoke. "After graduation, I got the internship in another city," she began quietly. "I thought it was my big break. I wanted to surprise you when I got the job, but things went wrong." Ethan leaned in. "What do you mean?" "My boss." He seemed kind at first, supportive, but then he started asking for things that had nothing to do with work. When I refused, he made sure I was fired. I couldn't go back home because my parents had already disowned me for choosing art over law. I was too ashamed to ask you for help." She wiped her eyes. "So I left. I thought I could start over. But I couldn't find work, couldn't pay rent. I ended up on the streets." Ethan's fists clenched. "You should have called me, Leela. I would have come for you." She looked at him sadly. "I know, but I didn't want you to see me like that, broken, lost. You had dreams. You were doing so well. I didn't want to drag you down." Ethan shook his head. "You were never a burden. You were my life." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I thought disappearing would make it easier for you." He sighed deeply, running his hands through his hair. "Do you know what it did to me when you left? I searched for you everywhere. I even went to your parents. They said you were gone, that I should move on. But I couldn't. I kept hoping I'd find you someday." She lowered her eyes, unable to meet his gaze. The waiter arrived with the food, breaking the tension for a moment. Leela took a small sip of the hot chocolate, her hands still trembling. Ethan watched her silently. She was thinner than he remembered, her once bright eyes dimmed by years of struggle. Yet, beneath the weariness, she was still the same girl he had fallen in love with. When she finished eating, he asked gently, Where have you been staying? Sometimes at the shelter, she replied. Other times, outside. It depends on the weather. He nodded slowly, then said firmly, not anymore. Leela frowned. What do you mean? You're coming with me, he said. At least for tonight. I can't let you go back out there. She hesitated. Ethan, I don't want your pity. It's not pity, he said. It's care, something you should have never had to live without. After a moment of silence, she nodded weakly. He drove her to his apartment, a small but cozy place filled with warmth. As she stepped inside, she looked around, tears threatening again. I never thought I'd see you again, she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. Neither did I, but maybe this time, you're not leaving. He gave her his bedroom and slept on the couch. But he barely closed his eyes that night. He kept thinking about everything she had gone through. How the girl who once painted the world with colors was now afraid to look in the mirror. In the morning, he made breakfast. The smell of eggs and toast filled the air. Leela came out slowly, wearing one of his old shirts. I feel like a ghost from your past, she said softly. You're part of my present now, Ethan replied. They sat together, and for the first time in years, she smiled, a small, fragile smile that reminded him of better days. Over the next few weeks, Ethan helped her get back on her feet. He took her to the doctor, bought her new clothes, and encouraged her to start painting again. At first, she resisted. It's been so long, she said. I've forgotten how. But one evening, he came home to find her sitting by the window, a brush in her hand, and a canvas glowing under the soft light. The painting was of the same street where he had found her, the mall lights, the snow, and a man giving his coat to a girl. He stood there silently, his eyes moist. That's us, she said quietly. The moment I realized miracles still exist. Months passed, and Leela slowly began to heal. She found work as an art teacher at a local community center. The students adored her kindness and creativity. Her laughter returned, and so did the sparkle in her eyes. But there was still something she hadn't said, a secret that weighed on her heart. One evening, as they walked through the park, she stopped and said, Ethan, there's something you need to know. He looked at her, concerned. What is it? When I left, 3 years ago, I was pregnant. The world seemed to stop. Ethan stared at her, speechless. I lost the baby, she continued, her voice breaking. The stress, the hunger, I couldn't protect our child. That's why I couldn't face you. I felt like I'd failed both of you. Tears streamed down her face, and she turned away. Ethan's heart shattered. He stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. Leela, he whispered, his voice trembling. You didn't fail. You survived. That's more than anyone could have asked for. You did what you could with what you had. She cried silently against his chest, and he held her tighter, as if afraid she'd disappear again. From that day on, they stopped looking backward. They focused on what they could build now, together. Leela's art began to gain recognition. She started an exhibit called The Lost and Found, dedicated to people who had fallen through life's cracks but managed to stand again. Each painting told a story of resilience and hope. At the opening night, the gallery was full. People admired her work, unaware that behind those colors were years of pain and healing. Ethan stood proudly beside her. When a journalist asked what inspired her collection, she smiled and said, "A stranger who refused to let me stay lost." After the event, they walked home hand in hand. The city lights shimmered just like that night months ago. Leela looked up at him and whispered, "Do you ever think about how everything came full circle?" Ethan nodded. Sometimes the people who walk away are meant to find their way back when both hearts are ready. She smiled. I used to think my story ended the day I left you. But now I realize, it was just the beginning. They stopped near the same mall where it all started. A small group of volunteers was handing out food to the homeless. Leela walked over and joined them, handing out warm meals with a gentle smile. Ethan watched her, his heart swelling with pride. When she finished, she walked back and said, Every time I see someone sitting alone out here, I remember that night. If you hadn't stopped, I might not be here today. He cupped her face gently. I didn't save you, Leela. You saved yourself. I just reminded you that you still could. The snow began to fall softly around them. Leela leaned against him, whispering, "Thank you for finding me." He smiled, "Thank you for coming back." And as they walked away together, the world around them seemed a little warmer. Because sometimes love doesn't end with goodbye. It waits in the shadows, through time, through pain, until it's found again in the unlikeliest places. This was one of those stories, not of perfection, but of redemption. A reminder that even when everything falls apart, kindness can be the spark that rebuilds what was lost. This is Heart of the Guardians, where every heart has a story, and every story has the power to heal.